Yeah, so hi everyone, I'm Linas. I'm a PhD student here at Stanford in cognitive science. And so the main inspiration behind my project is something I've been actually working on in my research in cognitive science, which is the concept of entropy, meaning essentially how much information something simple like a word or a phrase of words can actually contain. And so when I first started using Ableton, which was around like 6 or 7 months ago, I was just quite overwhelmed by just the enormous amount of like instruments you could use and like, the effects you could use, and it was kind of hard to know even like where to start. And so in this piece, essentially, I tried to instead do the reverse, which is ask myself what is the minimum unit of sound from which I could actually derive instrument sounds and melodies from. And so the project for this quarter for me was trying to design a setup where all the instruments I'm going to be using right now in this setup, they're all derived from a single phrase, a single audio recording of me saying hello world. And there's nothing cringier than like playing your own voice, but I'll have to show you how it actually sounds like. Hello world. Hello world. Let me try example. Yeah, so essentially I'll play 3 different sequences of sort of melodies that I derived that are just kind of like of different styles, just to show like how versatile like the instrumental range can be when you kind of start off from something simple as me saying 2 words from an audio recording, and just how many instruments you can derive, how many sounds you can derive from that. So kind of the starting point, I'll just spend like maybe 2 or 3 minutes just going for like a few instruments that I sort of like derived from it. So like the natural starting point is, you know, like you divide the audio recordings into each word you're using. I could potentially up the sound a bit. And then starting with the drum rack, I'll just make like just show like 2 basic illustrations. But like for the kicks, I started off with essentially me say like the recording of me saying L in world, a tiny bit of the L, which sounds like this. And if I extend this, you should be able to hear the full. Yeah, it's a bit loud here. But this is just a tiny bit of the L recording. And so if I bring it down 3 octaves, and then apply a few basic effects to cut the frequencies, I can actually get a pretty reasonable kick. And then similarly with the snare, I essentially used the letter D in world. So you can see essentially the letter D and just the ending right after that in the audio recording. And you can hear the original here. Just me the in world. And then if I bring it up an octave and then play 3 different notes at once, and then add some saturation, and then also like cut some frequencies and sort of like amplify the others, I get this. Which sounds like a lot more like a proper snare. And then kind of in this way, you know, I derive like a bunch of different snares, kicks, subs, hi-hats. Second sort of like method that I used was like cutting part of the word to derive somewhat like synthesizer sounding sounds. So here, I'll just show a very brief illustration. So this is a recording of me saying or in world. If I just take the reverb out and reduce this. Simple as that. Now if I add reverb and then just reduce some of the high frequencies, I get this. So very similar. Sounds pretty bad. Most of the things sound pretty bad, you're just trying to make it sound good. So that's kind of the whole part of the project. But if I essentially amp it up like 3 octaves, I can essentially get some of the nicer sounding high notes like this. And then if I arpeggiate the sound and then cut the first part of it, I can get something like this. And then the last thing I'll illustrate, and I'll sort of like transition to the actual song, is the use of wavetables. So like so far I've just been like cutting like small pieces of the word of the sample and then like applying different effects. But there's also an instrument in Ableton called wavetable. So the way to think about the wavetable is essentially it's going to take an audio sample. It usually takes something like a sine wave, but you can actually upload a small audio sample to it as well. And it's going, you can see here, it's going to cut that sample into a bunch of different tiny pieces, tiny bits of sound. It's kind of the same way like when you're filming a video or looking at a video on like an iPhone, you can at the bottom see all the frames, and you can like scroll through all the frames of the video. In the same way, these are like different frames, different tiny audio waves of it. So I can sort of recover the basic sound here, and especially if I disable this. And then again, if I were to arpeggiate that sound, and now you can see I'm playing kind of the whole wave, but instead of the whole wave, I can also just play a bit of it. also like happy to explain afterwards how like I derived all the other sounds. They just had like sort of like little time to explain every single instrument in it.
Linas, you led off talking about entropy for a second. So how does entropy fit into this?
Yeah, I think the point was to say, you know, like I think we're used to sort of this like abundance of sounds and instruments as like the starting point of like, you know, you sort of like, you know, you sculpt out a piece taking, you know, all these different variety of instruments.
Mm-hmm.
But it just kind of seemed like in some ways like starting from the scarce point of view, like the minimal amount, and then sort of like paying an extremely careful attention to sort of how you want or like getting the sound to where you want it to be. In some ways, actually, for me, was like a big source of inspiration. So weirdly enough, it was kind of helpful or easier to come up with like a composition once you have these insane constraints. Because, you know, there's like not like, you know, you cannot really compose any sound. We can, and then starting from there, you know, sort of going to where you want to be. So it was just a very helpful exercise in kind of like learning how to like, or like, one way of doing composition.
Yeah, it was really fun watching that kind of open up, you know, through the quarter. I was just thinking of a different way of thinking, you know, like the whole process you went through at the end. If you didn't know that it was Hello World, that's the germ in the beginning, could you have reverse engineered what you just played back to Hello World? Or is entropy really at work here?
Yeah, so like at the beginning, I mean, I spent like half of the quarter where I couldn't, like it was just so hard to escape that phrase. As in like everything I've tried, it would still sound like me saying give her hello world. And it just took so much effort to sort of find all these ways to move out of it. Like for example, for like the middle part of this like more techno-y sound, what I discovered was like kind of helpful is you can actually just, what is it? It is, yeah, here. I essentially just took like that, like, you know, or, and then I would play a note and then essentially just cut most of it. And then learn that like essentially if I just cut each note into these tiny, tiny snippets and then add them all together, it produces like a much more interesting sound. So it's sort of like finding all these workarounds to an extent. And then, so, but it was the whole journey could also sort of be like something like that.
But there is a hidden message.
Yeah, it would be, I mean, in some ways I was kind of thinking of like, should I be faithful? Because I didn't have any vocals as well, right? So I could have had some vocals to be very faithful, but the point was maybe to show just how far off you can move away from it. In some ways that like, maybe like, it's sort of like you can't even recover this, right? From this kind of like phrase. And you can move like so far away that it's not just about like me playing with